When a 2,000-pound animal stands between you and your destination, the laws of physics demand you give way. On a busy road through the north rim of the Grand Canyon, the bison are out, giving tourists some digital memories and making the trip home a little slower.
The bison herd that's at Grand Canyon National Park now is descended from a herd that was brought into the House Rock area in 1906.
A combination of drought, forest fire, and hunting all pushed the herd up to the Kaibab Plateau, where they found lots of food, few predators, and protection of sorts from the National Park Service, where open hunting is not allowed.
So starting about the 1990s or so, there were maybe 100 bison on the north rim of Grand Canyon National Park, and that number has increased over the years.
It's not every day you catch a glimpse of the bison here, but it has become increasingly common as the herd grows to an estimated 600 bison today, all making their mark on a wilderness that ecologically isn't made for these numbers.
By all indication, at least in our more modern times, bison were not here essentially, at least in the numbers that they're out here now. And so the ecology, the ecosystem, just hasn't evolved with that number of bison on the landscape, and that's why you're starting to see all these adverse impacts.
You see, when you weigh anywhere from 1,700 to 2,500 pounds, it takes a lot of food to fuel you. Up to 30 pounds of grass a day per bison.
So outside the park, you generally will have grasses, upwards of, this high, maybe even a little higher, depending on time of year and how well the forage is actually coming in. But out here, you just have, our meadows are just overgrazed.
Fewer grasses means less food for other critters like mule deer and elk. And these big animals don't tread lightly.
So the spring is just right over here.
We hike through some forests of the canyon to an old spring that's a favorite of the bison.
Well, bison really found this spring roughly 5 years ago.
In a place where water resources are scarce, an animal that requires 10 gallons of water a day can turn a spring into a mud hole.
This has a huge impact on a lot of different species that rely on this water source, So from mule deer to different terrestrial carnivore species to our 22 different bat species that we actually have here at the canyon.
There's little debate that these giant mammals need to find a better place to roam. Many conservationists, like Allison Gitlin with the Sierra Club, agree.
I think they need to be controlled and they need to be rounded up and moved out of the park. I think the protection of park resources should be the ultimate goal of this project, and I think it's really important that we act now to move these animals away from the park.
Act now because as the herd wanders the Kaibab with scant natural predators to keep their reproduction in check, they could number as high as 1,500 in 10 years. So biologists, conservationists, and the National Park Service wrestle with the reality that to protect one resource, they may have to potentially harm another.
What we're really trying to do right now is to reduce the herd as quickly as we can over the next 3 to 5 years.
The short-term plan is two-pronged. Some of the herd will be rounded up and moved to an area that can handle them ecologically speaking, an idea favored by the Sierra Club.
I think we would all like to see that non-lethal culling be the first goal and the primary goal.
But these big guys can be surprisingly elusive. We heard them in the forest a number of times, but we spooked them before we ever saw them.
It's nearly impossible to get these bison to move where you want them to go in this super thick forest.
Still, an experimental effort a few years ago had some success.
So we were able to corral roughly about 50 animals, and we actually moved 19 of those successfully down to House Rock Valley.
Those kinds of numbers won't make much of a dent in the immediate future. So the second part of the bison plan is lethal culling, where volunteer hunters will work with the Park Service to shoot bison, and the meat will be donated to tribes and food banks.
Most likely it'll look very similar to what some of the other parks have done with elk, such as Teddy Roosevelt and Rocky Mountain National Park, where we employ skilled volunteers to actually go out and help us reduce the herd.
The goal is that a herd of just 200 will be left to roam the canyons and forests inside the park. Majestic is a term used often with this view and this one. The hope is that the majesty of both can be preserved together.
They're just being bison, you can't blame them. I mean, bison are fantastic, incredible creatures, but they just need to be in the right place in the right numbers.